Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of CaCo Talks. Tonight, we got our first rewind of 2023, and we'll be watching and discussing a favorite film of ours called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. This is a film from 1963. It's great fun. It's got a lot of satire. So buckle up, tune in, and get ready for this episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of CaCo Talks. As you heard in the intro, tonight we're doing a rewind episode where we are watching and discussing a film with you guys. Tonight we're doing a film that honestly, I guess we were kind of made to watch as little kids, and then we actually ended up liking. But it's a classic film. I'm sure if you're listening, you might not have heard it. It's kind of obscure, but classic. It's called It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. It is from 1963. It was written by a couple named William and Tana Rose, or Tana, I don't know. Directed by Stanley Kramer, who was a big Hollywood director at the time. And the cast was full of, the entire cast was basically Hollywood comedy legends, notables at the time, like Spencer Tracy, Milton Berle, Sid Caesar, Buddy Hackett, Ethel Merman, Mickey Rooney, Phil Silvers, Buster Keaton, Jimmy Durante, Don Knotts. Those names might not mean much to us now, but in 1963 and before then, they meant a lot. So,
yeah, because I was about to say, these are not names I know by any means.
Yeah, if you watch a lot of older movies, you would know, but that would be the same as me saying Eddie. These are it would be like Eddie Murphy for us, and Kevin Hart in a movie. Let's see, probably Tiffany Haddish, even people like Monique or Steve Harvey, or I'm trying to think who are white really famous ones like Amy Schumer.
And Hathaway. You mean like comedians or
Comedians? Yeah, I'm trying to list comedians.
Okay.
I'm trying to think who's a really famous
What's
white
that
comedian.
white guy? He's married to that black lady, or he was. I don't know if he's divorced or something.
I don't know. But that's all of them slammed into one movie. That's what this was in 1963, if you can imagine that. I don't know. Why can I not recognize other famous white comedians? Why do I feel like
I only knew that one guy, and I don't remember his name. So,
or I don't know. I don't know why Jerry Seinfeld is coming to my head. I know he's a comedian, but he's kind of from the 90s. So, but all famous. Yeah, all famous comedians, or Amy Poehler was really famous as a stand-up comic at one point.
He's a comedian, right?
Jonah Hill, yeah, I think he was a comedian. He's a comedian.
Adam Sandler, he's kind of funny.
Adam Sandler, yeah, it's all of them smashed into one picture, one movie. That's basically what they did. They rounded everybody up and was like, okay, we got a role for you. And they did. They really did. So, yeah, first off, let's discuss. How did you like the film? Rewatching it,
I didn't remember majority of the film, to be quite honest. But one thing I will say is it is very it's like old school comedy. So if you enjoyed that, this is a good movie for you. And it's the least serious movie you could probably ever think of. So overall,
on the surface,
yeah. Underneath, there's a good amount of serious themes. But surface level and just visually, it's just made to make you laugh, really. It was interesting to watch a movie from the 60s because of how different things are, you know what I mean? There's some certain scenes or whatever where you can just tell they obviously didn't have the tools at the time, but it's just not real.
Yeah.
And also too, or somebody will be falling out of the sky or something like that, for example, and you can tell it's a stunt dummy. It looks like a little beanbag. So it's interesting and cool to see how things were back then, because it's definitely different. So that was good to see. Anyways, overall, it was a pretty good. Can't complain. Very long. I will say that. That's one thing I will critique. It's very long to be so simple, I guess, in theme or motif or whatever you want to call it. So they really like draw it out. Like the ending is the substance of the movie. They could have made this maybe like 15 minutes if they really wanted to. But
yeah,
other than that, pretty good.
Yeah, so something people really don't realize is not only does time change, and so technology changes, and obviously you were mentioning like the stunt double. You could see it was clearly a stunt double or like a beanbag or something. Um, but what also changes is cinema culture, like how certain themes and plots and characters and some things are presented, right? Because like in the 1960s, people's attention span, I'm gonna be honest with you, is longer. And it's not
Oh
because
yeah.
like people just in and of themselves, it's because like longer material was being presented to them at the time, you know? Like I was watching a movie that was almost 4 hours long. That's the movie that won an Oscar in the year before. So like 1962, that movie is 4 hours long, and this movie is 2.5 hours long. So people were a little bit more conditioned by, cinema itself, basically to sit longer and watch something longer and sit with it
True.
longer. You know what I mean? Um, and then also you think about the comedy style at the time, the 1960s. That was still very slapstick, kind of. I'm not gonna say vaudeville, but sort of that kind of very physical comedy, kind of like bumbling idiots, like he ran into the wall, everybody
Yeah,
gets to
yeah,
laugh,
for
like
sure.
stuff that we kind of would just be like, roll your eyes, like seen it a million times now, but then that would have gotten laughs. You know what I mean? So versus now, I think comedy is very much just one-liners, things that are spoken very rapidly, quickly, and kind of innuendo based for
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, for sure.
It's less people falling out of the sky and crashing planes into buildings and all these like very obvious comedic, like
Yeah.
ploys and, tools. So yeah, that's another cultural thing, and that's why, like you were saying, the middle of the movie is so heavy, full of that. I would say like probably a good third of the movie is just that very physical comedy going back and
Yeah.
forth between the characters of like this one's doing this one's doing that, and like and getting all the laughs basically because that's what people were going to go see. Now people go to see honestly how good you can manipulate technology to make something look very real. I would say
Yeah.
it's more
Or
about
even
the
your like the character, like the person into the character.
yeah, that too. I think ours are formed the way we watch things now, or the way I'm gonna say the way Hollywood produces things now, because there's always a difference between what Hollywood is producing and what people actually like. That's like the big secret. But so what Hollywood produces now is more of that how close can we get to reality and how quickly can we get people in and out, basically, like
True.
of
Yeah.
these films. I'm not saying either one is like the best. They both obviously have their drawbacks, but that's why when we watch these old films, it feels very like, dang, they're still going, you know? But something I always like, and what I realized too, for me, I just like the aesthetic, the look of these old films because the color is so saturated. I don't know if that's what you noticed too. Like, obviously, it's a color film, but the colors are much more saturated, kind of like falsely saturated than like
Yeah, yeah.
the films that we see now. Now, the films we see now can represent more accurate colors, obviously,
Yeah, it's way more
which
realistic.
yeah, more like real tones or kinda like neutral tones or even more muted tones, but everything if there's a color there, it's like bright. It's a bright red, it's a bright, true blue or
Yeah,
true
yeah.
yellow or true this and that makes it feel very, like, otherworldly, kinda dreamlike, and almost like this, like,
Yeah.
kind of utopic type state to it. I don't know. So that's why I like watching old films because they all have that kind of color when they actually are colored films, and it's because the coloring process wasn't happening, like, in the camera so much. The way, like, we like, cameras happen the camera picks up color now, you know what I mean? and it's very like accurate colors. So yeah, that's kind of our, opinions. I liked the film. It was great to because we got some nostalgia tied to it, so I liked it a lot, and I was glad to see it
Yeah,
again.
it wasn't a bad movie. I just think it was really, which I'm not a movie girl anyway, so like that's that. I would rather like a good TV show.
Yeah.
Um, and so I think that with the thing is like I can sit through a movie as long as it's like the plot is moving, but the plot kind of stays stagnant for like the majority. The plot really thickens um when you get to the end. So
Yeah.
it it I think that kind of get annoying, if you will. But overall,
Mhm.
it was good. The good thing is it was um, comedic in nature, so it gave you some relief in comedies, so that was nice. And then it was
Yeah.
good to just kind of like watch it back because I had watched. I don't know if I watched the whole thing as a kid or not. I don't remember the whole thing. I remember bits and pieces of it, but I do
Mhm.
remember it being funny. So
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that's really, I think we share the same sentiments. I mean, I liked
mhm.
it. It does. I realize how much it dragged now that we're a
Oh
little
yeah.
bit older. I didn't realize as a kid how
hmm
much it dragged, but now I know. I'm like, oh, no, this really drags.
Which I wonder if is that like a creative approach because that's kind of how like I don't know. I guess we can hit on this a little bit more later, but like the uh like the urge to have that type of money. You know what I mean? Like you
I
have to
don't
constantly.
know. I don't. I
So
mean,
I wonder
maybe
if
maybe
it's
that's
that.
part of it. Is like they let it go that long because it was like, look how much these people are doing for
Mm,
the. You know what I mean? I think at a certain point it did become absurd because it was like
mm-hmm.
they're they're not just chasing the money anymore. They're hurting themselves. And so I
Yeah.
think that was driven home is like after
Oh,
watching it,
for
you're
sure.
like, this is getting absurd. It's not
It's
even
obnoxious.
it's like
It's
sort of being
utterly obnoxious.
yeah, it's like it's mad. It's actually mad, you know? So
Mm-hmm.
maybe that was
The
part
thing
of
is,
it.
like that's I think so. I wonder if like the time is like something that they're trying to portray because like that is real. Like people
Yeah.
are willing to do some uncomprehendable things to make sure that they are quote unquote wealthy. So
Yeah, and I never thought about it like that, but you're right. Yeah, I think that probably could have been an artistic reason they did that is because they were like they kind of keep going for a while. I would say like
yeah, yeah,
a solid 45, probably a solid 45 minutes to maybe 30 to 45 minutes was just them kind of like rumbling around trying to figure out how to, just trying to on the journey trying to get there. So
yeah.
maybe
hmm
that's why they kept going so long is because it's just showing the absurd lengths. And like they ended up in so many
Yeah.
different little subplots of the film just
hmm
trying to get to the main plot, to get to what they were really
Yeah.
trying to go after. And so you're right.
Which
That
I
could have
mean,
that
that's
could have
also
been it.
indicative of like that constant need to be rich. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
You are
they
constantly trying to do these little odd things in and out to like get to
were you
um
yeah. That's true.
I guess
That's true.
financial wealth. So
Yeah, and maybe that's it. And then they add different characters in later who have their own
hmm
subplot. So like, yeah,
yep, and then
I
they
actually
got
I
their cut.
yeah, absolutely. I think if they would have actually now I'm thinking if they would have shortened it, to be honest, that point might not have been driven home as clearly as it was.
Yeah, that's true.
Now I'm
That's
thinking
true.
about it, if we didn't see some of those like, scenes, it wouldn't have
hmm
been driven home quite as how
Yeah,
crazy,
I don't think you
you
would have
know?
gotten the absurdity of it if you had cut the movie.
Yeah,
Honestly,
it would have just been like,
I do
"Oh,"
think.
it would have slipped by.
Yeah, I can see that. I do think that like, there are certain things that could possibly be like omitted, but if you have that rationale in the back of your mind, then like it makes sense. So,
Yeah. Okay, that's a good assessment. I like that. Well, since we're kind of talking about some of the deeper themes in the movie, let's go ahead and get into some of the key
mhm.
facts and kind of the basic plot. So spoiler alert, just so you know, if you have not seen the film, I encourage you to go watch it first before we discuss because we don't want you, you know,
And it's free on Tubi.
on Tubi.
So,
Yeah, for sure.
mhm.
Um, So yeah, the basic kind of plot is basically these people are they're driving through Southern California, like, standard mountainscape. And as they're driving, there's this car that's just going super fast. I was like, what the heck? What is this car doing? And it rolls off the edge of a cliff, which is not hard to do in California. There are cliffs everywhere. If you run off one of them cliffs, that's the end of it. So this car runs off the edge of a cliff, and then the little bit of passersby who are behind stop and of course are like, oh shoot, we just saw this car roll off a cliff. They go down there, they see the man as he's dying. He's obviously had an accident. And as he's dying, the man says, there is a park in Santa Rosita, which is where he was traveling to, with $350,000 under a big W in the sky. He tells them that. And they're like, okay. They're kind of like there to like check out, make sure, try to see if the guy's okay, like help out. You know what I mean? So they're kind of listening, kind of not, or at least they pretend to be. And so he tells them there's all this money. And, the guys who are standing around are kind of like, oh man, well, there's nothing to be done. Like after the guy eventually passes away, the guy who ran off the cliff, he eventually passes away. But they have this new knowledge now that there's $350,000 under this big W at a park in Santa Rosita, which is maybe, I don't know what, like maybe an hour away, maybe an hour or two away from where they were.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So of course they're like, well, who knows if the guy could have just been joshing us. We don't know. We're not going to stress it too much. But then they all start thinking, they're like, hold on. If this guy's true, then I could come into some money. So then off to the races. One of them starts going fast down. Once they get back into the cars, one of them starts going fast down the road, and then the other one starts, and the race is on until the very end of the film when they all get to the park. And we'll talk about the ending later, but that just kind of sets up like the main tension of the film,
Mm-hmm.
And then of course shenanigans ensue from there, right? Like, cause how we all gonna get the money? How we gonna split the money? How we gonna do, you know what I mean? Like all these things come up. So from a screenwriter's perspective, that is gold. Okay. That is a really good, simple, honestly sellable plot line that really makes for good comedy, makes for good tension, makes for good characterization. You can really get into a lot with just that basic plot structure. So I think that's actually what makes this film last through the decades, and this plot line kind of classic is because it's relatable. Who doesn't want money, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And
Most
also
people are
just
willing to do some crazy things to get it.
to
So
get money, yeah. And it asks a lot of like, it seems simple on the surface, like who doesn't want money, but then it's like these questions are actually get really deep into like human nature too. It's like then comes the question of like greed, of empathy, of compassion, like of deception, like all these like really deep core character type questions come up on the surface of money, right? So yeah, and just so you guys know, I looked this up for reference. $350,000 doesn't sound like a whole heck of a lot. I mean, it is a lot of money even for today. But just so you know, like that would have been $3,209,891 in today's money, adjusted for inflation. So that makes it like for them in 1963, that's why they was going crazy, because that's $3 million. They could have. That's like a small fortune. They really could have come up on,
Yeah, and money went a lot further then. So
yeah, money went a lot further then. But I just think it's good to know because people now would be like $300,000. You're gonna kill yourself for that. Some people would be like that, but $3 million, most of us are getting in our car and driving on down to see what's going on.
Honestly, sounds good to me. So
yeah, exactly. So yeah, they're hoping to like strike it rich, essentially, by hearing this man's news. Yeah, and I'll go over some of the formal qualities. Were there any formal qualities you noticed, just about the film and how it was shot that you thought was really interesting or worth noting? I have a couple, but
I thought I don't know what you call them, but like the scenes where they're like, I guess when it was like rolling down the hill compared to like when they're in the car, it was pretty like interesting to see. those are those scenes I was like mentioning earlier. Like you could pretty clearly tell that it was fake, but it was like interesting and like their facial expressions, and you see them like bouncing around and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Those were, which I think that's, I think you have that to mention too. But it was interesting to see that, and because we don't. Most things aren't like that in today's films. Everything's very hyper realistic,
Mm-hmm.
or futuristic. So you don't have that, and which I think that type of scene adds a level of comedy, so it makes sense for the time, for sure. But that was pretty interesting and informative to watch. What else happened? I think we already mentioned the colors are very like they're like primary colors but like muted.
Yeah.
um so that was interesting to see, and also too I think it adds a level of it adds to the idea that this is not real or realistic, or like it's funny, you know what I mean? Like it's like these
Yeah.
colors that are overly like playful, if you will, but like
Mm-hmm.
still rich in nature to
Yeah.
get across the colors that they're trying to get, but they're very like pastel-y and fun and light and friendly. So that
Yeah.
was cool to see. I think also too that like obviously we're watching on Tubi, so like the quality on Tubi is a little different than what you would have seen in the 60s, but
Mm-hmm.
the fuzziness of it like adds a level of
Yeah.
like um I don't think that was the goal back then, that's just what they had, but it adds a level of like um lack of seriousness because it's not so rich, it's not super realistic, it's not what we visually see on a day-to-day basis.
Mm-hmm.
There's like some grain to it, so it like
Mm-hmm.
adds like it's kind of like adding animation, if you will, to something that's
Yeah,
like
that's
realistic.
good. No, that's a really
So,
good. And I didn't even think about the film quality, like that graininess, which is true.
mhm.
That was all they had. They were shooting on film, so like
Yeah.
the graininess is always there. But yeah, that gives it that kind of animated, like
Mhm.
kind of look, like the characters are kind of like moving in these like
Yeah, like old school, like Mickey Mouse. Like it gives it that kind of
yeah,
look, but like in a realistic nature, because you have like I mean, real people are there acting, obviously.
real people.
So,
Yeah,
but I think it adds to the level of like comedy, um, because it has that more of like kiddish, fun, less seriousness vibe compared to what we see
hmm
today when it's like hyper realistic. The colors are like matching what you see on a day to day.
hmm
You have um, like real people acting, and it literally looks like you're walking outside.
yeah,
Compared to this, it doesn't. You can tell it's either old or that it's supposed to be like funny, I think.
yeah. No, that's good. That's definitely those are formal qualities, and I think that actually that contributes to the narrative, like you were saying.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, so some of the formal qualities I noticed was like just those very wide sweeping shots. Like,
Hmm.
those first shots we would see with them coming down those mountains in their cars. And it's just like the California desert basically and the road, and they're just winding down the road. It's very open land, very wide shots. Um, and those were obviously used throughout the entire film. Mainly because there's so much space to do that kind of thing, so they do it. You know what I mean? Um, and then I noticed too that when they got into the cars, because a lot of the tension arises obviously between the characters. So when they get in the
Yeah.
car, they use the same kind of shot, like it's that same front window shot the
Yeah. Yeah. That's
people,
true.
and it's like one person driving, one in the middle seat, one over here, and they use that same shot. Yeah, they literally that exact
Hmm.
same shot for each of the different vehicles, for the truck,
Everything.
for the
Yeah.
millionaire's car, for the two dudes, the I don't I know Mickey Rooney. I don't even know what you
All
call him.
four of the
Yeah,
cars,
all
even
four of the
the additional
cars.
cars.
Yeah, the additional cars, they use that same exact shot, which you can tell that it's
Hmm.
not even, they shot that in the studio because you see the background tape just like rolling.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
background thing. It's not even like they actually shot that like moving or anything. They really shot
No,
it with
yeah,
like,
you can like you can just tell it's fake, but I
yeah, you
think it
could tell
adds
it's
to the
like,
comedy, so I get it.
yeah, for sure. So I like that they did that because when we're cutting that immediately raises the tension because we see what's going on in the millionaire's car and what's going on in the truck driver's car, and we see them try
Yeah.
to process like, wait, how am I gonna get? And they're like,
Mhm.
is he gonna go? Is he gonna go? Is he gonna go?
Yeah.
And we know they don't know, but the audience is like, yeah,
Mhm.
they're about to go. You know what I mean? So that really
Mhm.
immediately creates that tension for us, and we're using the same shot to see them through. So it's like, oh, this is ratcheting up higher and higher and higher, you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, and I think it is also too, and, like, I don't know if we talked about it, but, like, the cuts are very, pretty quick. So, like, I
Yeah.
think that adds to the level of tension too, because like, everything is happening so rapidly, like, it's just, like, cut after cut after cut after cut, between, like, the 4 cars and the car scenes when they're going through, and they're just kinda like, "What is this one thinking? What is this one thinking? What is this one thinking? What is it?" And
Yeah.
so you're just like, "Oh my god," like, it's just all over the place.
Yeah.
But I think that's the point, like, it's supposed to be
It's
all over
like
the place so that
confusion.
you Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like the
And
same
there's no
shot.
reasoning, rhyme or reason, like, there's nothing you don't even have time to process, that's what it is, you don't even have
Exactly.
time to
Yeah.
process.
It's just
Yeah, no.
happening. It's like this, that, that. And then it's like it becomes more about the confusion than the
Mhm.
actual pursuit of the goal. Like I would say this movie
Yeah,
is more about the characters being confused and like
yeah.
pursuing this idea that they don't know if the money's really there. The guy could have been
Mhm.
lying. They don't know. But they like are
Yeah,
like literally they like drive themselves into this kind of like
yeah.
delusion almost. And then
Mhm.
that makes them get into so many other little, like, situations and antics. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, and I definitely think, like you said, the cuts help create that because it's like, I don't really like, they cut it before you really process what image you're seeing or, like,
Mhm.
you're not sitting with
Yeah.
it for a long time before you move to somebody else's thoughts or whatever, you know?
Mhm.
And
And
it
they
also
circle back, but it's just, like, building on the tension every time or the confusion every time because 'cause you're like,
yeah,
"Oh, so that answered that question, but now you got another question." Um,
exactly,
so
yeah.
it's interesting.
And it creates also to, like, that sense of competition of like, "Well, he's doing that.
Yeah.
She's doing that. They're doing that." And then and then they're like, "Oh, shoot, gotta go," you know?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
so, yeah, I think that's great. I think this is really a well-directed film, in my opinion. I don't think there's anything like I mean, obviously, they made some intentional moves like we were just mentioning here, but it didn't
Mhm.
feel like the filmmaking outshadowed or overdid any of the plot, like, it went hand in hand with the plot, and I think that's what made it work
Mhm.
so well together. Um,
Yeah.
it wasn't distracting or confusing or, like, out of the blue or just whatever, you know? Um,
Yeah.
so
I
whoever
wonder
directed
too,
really
though.
sat down with that.
I
Go
wonder
ahead.
how much of like what we're talking about, if it was intentional, was like intentionally planned. Because I know like we're comparing it to the films that we see today,
Mm,
but they don't have the like what we see today as a reference point to be like, oh well, I'm going to strategically do X, Y, and Z. They're just
mhm.
doing what. Part of it is just what they had available, the equipment they had, right? And the thing is that was probably top notch. So,
Oh, yeah,
um,
definitely.
I wonder how much of, what we're talking about was, like, intentional about, like, the formalities and,
Well, I think
just
they probably
different
were intentional. I mean, if you're
yeah,
intentional with bringing the narrative that you know and you have to life using the tools, then, I mean, none of us know what's coming tomorrow, but, like, I think a lot of it probably was intentional, and now that we reflect, we can see, like, because we're so far ahead that it's like, "Oh, that must be probably what they were doing." You know
see,
what I
I think a
mean?
lot of
Which
this
would have been
wasn't
innovative at the
intentional.
time. You don't think so?
I think a lot of it wasn't intentional. I think some of it wasn't, like, obviously, like, the color, that wasn't
Mhm.
necessarily intentional because they only had the option of
Yeah.
recording with the devices that they had and then using the colors that they had. Like, the technology was not what it is today where you can have 50 million green. You had maybe 2 or
Mhm.
3, you know?
Yeah.
Um, so, like, that kinda stuff is unintentional, but it's, like, comparing it to the films that we see today, it conveys a certain look, theme, um, vibe, if you will, versus, like, then, like, that's just all they had. So,
That's
even
true,
with,
you're
like,
right.
the cutting quick, that's the only option they had was, like, cutting quick because they didn't have the equipment to just film for hours and hours and hours and then take 45 minutes out of a 3-hour shot. So
Yeah,
'cause somebody's feeding that.
that's
Um,
true.
so I wonder, I truly wonder how much of it really was intentional or it's just like, this is what we got, as far as the
Yeah.
resources that we had.
Well, I'm sure they probably obviously everybody does the best of what they have.
Yeah.
So, I'm sure their thoughts were, "Okay, let's make the best movie we can given our script, given our actors, given that." And
Mhm.
then when it comes time to edit, then we'll see what we got, and then make that as poetic as possible, you know?
Yeah.
I'm sure that's probably what happened, but like you said, I mean, some of it probably is intentional, was unintentional, and it was just like that was the technology that we had. And then looking back, we can say, okay, well, we can assess it from a different lens because we're like, well, what we have now, we know so much more about how this can operate or like what can work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's always a level of intentionality anytime you're directing something. So something was intentional, I'm sure. But you know, because cutting a film is always the same, whether you're doing it on a computer or whether you're cutting literal film strips. How you cut and how quickly you cut is always intentional. So that, you know, I think is intentional for sure. And the style of shots, like those big wide shots, that was intentional. The same little 2 shots in the car, that was intentional. Going back and forth quickly between that was intentional, you know. Some of the directing, I mean, some of the like actors' movements and stuff, that all had to be intentional because that stuff is core and will never change. That's just filmmaking, you know. So I would imagine those things were intentional, but then there's other things that obviously we see later now because technology, you know.
Yeah.
So I think it's a little bit of both to answer your question, to be honest.
Yeah, probably.
But yeah, okay. So do you want to get into some of the themes of the film? We kind of talked about the formal qualities and we gave an overview, but yeah, so obviously one of the themes, and this is a major theme, is humanity's drive for money, like this basic
That's the
instinctual
whole movie.
drive, yeah, for money. Like we see all these different types of characters. We got a millionaire, we got wives, we got a trucker, we got like mother-in-law, you know, we even have her son come. We got like the taxi cab driver. There's like this little like insurance scammy dude. Yeah, the Australian guy. Like all these types of characters who like at the end of the day, they all drop everything, whatever they were about to go do, and go try to find this money. You know? So it's like all these different types of people are driven towards money, basically. Yeah.
Even
So
the one guy, he had money and he was still like after it.
yeah, there was people who had money and were like, we about to come up on some more, let's go, you know?
Yeah. And the things they were willing to do just to get it. Like one guy, he got a plane and like put it on credit on a traveler's check. It was like, you don't even know if the money's there. Okay.
Right.
One guy was the police officer and he would set them all up, you know, like
Yeah.
crooked cop. I think that was a theme too, like the crookedness of law
The
enforcement.
cops. Yeah.
And, you know, just like officials, I guess, if you will. And the things they were willing to do for money too. So there's that. But who else was out there? The guy, the truck driver, he like was on a job and he just like stopped doing the job to make sure that he was going
Was
after
in
the
the
money that he
race.
did not know was even there. Like they're just, you know, it's all of a speculative. This dying guy saying that it's there, but that's you
It's
can't
kind of
take
sketchy. I mean,
everybody's word.
right. It's like, to be honest, even today we would be like, okay, and like, you know, that's why I think it's classic about this narrative is like they had no way of knowing whether this was real or not. And even today, we would have no way of verifying.
Yeah.
Whether that's
I
real or
wonder
not.
if I feel like that's low key like a little bit of a theme. It's like trusting in individuals because you see that like they trust this guy who tells them that this money is there. They're willing to trust him to say the money is there and trust that that it actually is there, right? But they're not able to talk amongst each other and trust they're not able to trust the people who are in this journey to find the money, that they'll get their cut or that they'll get there or whatever. And so they like bring in all these extra people that they think they can trust them, but they can't even trust them.
Exactly.
So like I think trust is a huge theme in this one as well.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like this kind of, it's almost like trust no one, but you got to trust somebody to get somewhere.
Yeah.
So it's like this, like, you don't ever win, you know?
Yeah, even the people close to you, like that one guy who had his wife and his mother-in-law, he, like, met the Australian guy, and but
Yeah,
then
and
it's
ended
like
up
the mom.
abandoning them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
abandoning them, and then they get in the car with somebody else, and they try to, like they get the keys well, no, those son-in-law and the guy end up, like, turning her over to get the keys out of her, bra, and
Mhm.
so, it's just, like, the lengths they're willing to go, like, you can't trust anybody, not even your mother-in-law, which she don't get me wrong, she was very problematic, so
Mhm.
I get why he doesn't trust her, but, um those are the people you should be able to trust, and he definitely could not. She even, like, brings her son in the mix, like, her son who
Yeah.
does nothing, who she thinks so highly of. That's a theme too,
Yeah.
um, which coincides with our lovely thoughts of men, so there's that.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. My
but yeah, those
favorite
are
is at the end, like, you remember at the beginning, they all were in, like, different cars, but then at the
mhm,
very end, you notice
all together.
everybody is yeah, like,
And then he's
half the
gone.
characters yeah, like, half the characters, it's like the mother-in-law, the daughter-in-law, the truck
Mhm,
driver, those 2 guys who were in the plane, and, like, the son are all in one car, that's how they show up to the park. I was like, all these people were
mhm,
totally the whole time trying to, like, stay away from each other, and they ended up in the
right?
same
And they
car.
end up together. And they
Like
end up together, they still don't trust each other to, like,
yeah.
do their cut or whatever, and get their portion. Um, but then once the money's all gone, they end up back together trying to work it
Exactly.
all out again. So
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like something I thought about too is, kinda like the spoils of the dead. You've ever heard of that? Like, what's left over from
mhm,
dead people? Like,
mhm,
how crazy it makes people to, like, get their hands on whatever is they feel like is owed them or left them after a
mm,
certain person dies. So, like,
yeah,
we saw that man, he literally kicked the bucket in the movie. He kicked the bucket. He
yeah,
died. And everyone was like, all right, now he said there's something left. What's in it for me? It's
mhm,
like you can't actually
yeah,
appreciate and remember the dead because as soon as that
mhm.
person dies, they're like, what do I get?
What
And
do
then
I
I
get
thought
from
about
it?
that's
Yeah,
how,
that's true.
yeah, like that's really honestly, that's deep because that's what people do in families. It's like when
Mhm,
grandma or grandpa dies, the first thing people want to do is, where's the will? Am I in it?
yeah.
What did I
Same
get?
thing with the
Do I
idea
get
of,
the
like,
house? Do I get the
generational
car?
wealth.
What'd you say?
Same thing with, like, the idea of, like, generational wealth, like, the goal is to leave
Mhm.
it for somebody else to, like, benefit off of,
Mhm.
um, and so, that I feel like that is the reverse of what you were saying, the spoils of the dead, in that it is a little bit more glamorized,
Mhm.
because that's essentially what you're doing, you're leaving it for somebody else to do this. So,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, hopefully, you have your things in place, but most people don't, so it becomes a fight, and,
Oh yeah.
it just becomes usually it doesn't turn out good ever.
Well, it overshadows remembering the person's life. It's like,
Yeah, the
what can I
dead.
get?
Yeah.
It's like
Mhm.
I wrote this down. I said how we tend to obsess over and compete for material goods left after someone, usually a loved one, passes away. Think about families
Yeah.
fighting over will. It drives people to do things that they wouldn't
Yeah.
ordinarily do against their own family
Yeah.
members.
Mhm.
And I thought about our personal family. I was like, I remember our mom being pretty hot after her father passed away
Yeah.
because of like not being in a will.
Will, yeah. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
like, that upsets her, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like, it really can whatever the dead leaves or doesn't leave can really cause rifts, for real, for real.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um
Yeah. Or, like, I think it's just the deceit with the whole process of, like, death is like, people can change things, people can alter things, people can hide things, and I don't know, like, that's not to say that people's feelings aren't valid in that, so I do
mhm,
wanna make that disclaimer, um,
mhm,
but, like, there's just a lot of deceit when people are no longer living because they're no longer living, like, they don't have the ability to be like, "This is what this is going, this is where that is going." It's,
yeah,
somebody else kinda deciding that, unfortunately, unless it's written out, and even then, because back then you had, like, paper wills, um,
exactly.
I think now you have someone that keeps. I think you can distribute the will to anybody, but you have, somebody kinda, like, reads over the will, like a lawyer or whatever, I think,
Yeah,
um, so which is, like, third party, but they get a cut too, so shoot.
exactly. Well, I think this film is specifically getting at just how quickly people are willing to, dismiss the dead if they think that can come up on something.
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
Yeah,
like,
like, you literally see
someone's
that
death
woman pass away, and
Yeah.
you don't hear it throughout the rest of the movie, you don't hear anything else
Anything
about
about
him.
him. Nothing about him,
Everything
just
else
like,
is
"Oh,
about
some
the
guy died, and that's why we're here."
Geiger.
Like,
Mhm.
and it's very much, like, no calling his family, no trying to figure out, like, be
Mhm.
more, like, emotional, kind of making sure people
Yeah.
are okay. It was like, "What do I get?" You
Even the
know?
2 guys that were looking for that guy who, like, ran off the
Mhm.
cliff, they were not concerned about his well-being, they were more concerned about what did he say, what did he
What
say,
he
what
Yeah, what did
did
he say?
he say? Did he say anything
Exactly.
at all? Like, they were just not they really could care less that he was dead, it was more of like,
Exactly, yeah.
did he say anything? What did he say? What were the details? And somebody better tell me now.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. It's like it's this weird way we see death as, like, almost transactional. As, like
yeah, it's like an opportunity. I feel
yeah,
like
they
that's
like
what
it's
it
like an
is.
opportunity, and I think they rendered that very it was
Very
subtle,
well.
but it was there. For
Yeah.
sure, it was like, these people are just over, like, a it's kinda morbid, actually, too. It's like people are
Yeah.
going insane over this dead man's potential fortune, you
I think
know?
it just shows, like,
Like
a lack of humanity, you know? Like, it's just like,
yeah. It's like it's
you're
pretty
really
crazy.
willing to overlook the loss of someone's life to make sure that you benefit from it,
Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
and at a whatever expense at that, so
Exactly, and I think that feeds into, kind of the next theme, which is this rat race and
Mhm.
all consuming and all corrupting, you know,
Mhm.
um, which to me, this becomes a major metaphor for American capitalism, greed, free enterprise, open market entrepreneurship, all of that, right?
Mhm.
Um, which is can be kinda collectively, termed under the rat race, like, "How do I get ahead?" basically. But we
Yeah,
see that
yeah.
it becomes all-consuming, all-corrupting, like, these people are actually, like, going kind of insane. Like,
For sure.
it starts out as like a, "Well, I'll just see how it goes," and then you're doing this, and that's wrong and corrupt, and you're like, "Okay, well,"
Mhm.
and then to get out of that, you gotta do this, that's corrupt, then that, and that, and that,
Yeah.
and that, and then you're just down a hole where you're like, "I'm not even the person I started out being," it
Yeah, you
just
lose
becomes
yourself in
this,
that.
you lose
Mhm.
yourself, yeah, and it's just all like I said, all consuming, all corrupting. Um,
You know what I think another good theme in this movie is too?
mm,
It's kinda like a the women versus men, like, the women are more like, "Oh,"
yeah,
like, except for the mother-in-law. The mother-in-law was very, like, adamant.
mhm,
Um, but the women were just kinda like, "Oh, I don't wanna do this, like, I'm just kinda here for the ride, like, oh, let's just
yeah,
keep on going and let's be satisfied." Um, so they're more of like, being satisfied with the lives and the luxuries that they do have, right? If you will. And then the men are just like constantly on
mhm,
edge to have something more. Like even the
like,
mother-in-law, which I
drive,
wonder
like,
if she
gotta
she's
get it, yeah,
yeah, which it sounds like to me like they didn't never mention like her husband or anything like that. So I wonder if she was like a single mom and so she had to be in like a more masculine state or something like that. Um
mhm,
so maybe that's why they portray her like that. But, I think there is like maybe like a little theme of, like, the women being satisfied with the things that they have and the guys being overly eager to just constantly have more. Because, like I said,
yeah.
some of these guys were already rich.
Yeah, I noticed that too, and I think that is definitely gender. I mean, I definitely also we gotta realize this is the 1960s, so like
Mhm.
to them, it was like that show Mad Men, like women are seen, not
Yeah,
heard. So like it was
true.
most common to characterize women if they were going to be in the film as either like sexual objects, sidekicks, or like sit down and be heard, seen, not
Yeah, I
heard.
wonder why they had the mother-in-law like that
I
then.
well, I think they had the mother-in-law because she's playing more of a caricature. She's more of the, like,
Mm,
nagging old woman, old bag type character, and that's why I think
yeah,
she's characterized so poorly, and even at the very end of the movie, you see she slips on the banana, and she's, like, the
mhm,
butt of the joke, like, she literally becomes the last joke of the whole film,
yeah,
um,
true.
so I think that they characterize her that way because she's, like, the type of woman that the type of woman they don't
Want to
like.
have.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
she behaves like the men, therefore she is
mhm.
not attractive as a woman,
Yeah,
you
and
know?
also the theme of, like, submissive versus dominant.
Yeah,
Um,
she's more dominant. She's
she's
willing to
not yeah.
assert herself, take charge, and, like,
Mhm.
today we would see mother-in-law be like, "She went for it." Like, her
Mhm,
character,
mhm.
she's like, "She
I was
went
gonna
and
say the
she
thing is
should
if
have
y'all probably
gotten."
woulda listened
Yeah.
if y'all woulda listened now, I don't know why she called her son because he was just dancing the whole movie, but,
Mhm.
um, I think if they first of all, if they could have just worked together, it would have been smooth, easy peasy, right? But they were being greedy. So there's like this theme of greed. Like, I have to have it all. I have to get there first. I have to be the person. If they are going to divvy it up, I have to be the one dividing. So, but the mother-in-law, she had a very strong like urge of that too. So
oh yeah, she was like, I think what they were just kind of trying to characterize and show is like the women who are invested in capitalism the same way the men are. Those are the women we find the most annoying and the most abhorrent. They're just as evil and corrupt and outlandish and assertive and aggressive as we are, and that's why we don't like them, you know. And that's why she was annoying everybody.
Also, too, they perceive her as like a threat, like, you know.
Yeah, because she could have taken it just like they could have, you know. And I think that's why they didn't like. That's why they had such a hard time with Mama, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
But versus the younger women, the other married women were like trying to tell their husbands, they're like, don't do this, don't try that, or like whatever. They just ended up in these situations because of their husbands. They weren't urging them to do anything. The husband was like, no, we're gonna do this. We're gonna, you know what I mean? And so they were portrayed as like more polite and more out of the picture and more, you know, agreeable, basically.
Some submissive.
So yeah, a little more submissive, and I think that's what made them, quote, more likable. We can get into the gender politics of that, but I think that's how they were trying to portray them, as like the good little girls versus the loud, abrasive mama, you know. Which is wild, because like today, I think most women would be on mama's train, like, I showed up.
Right.
I'm getting my cut, period. You know, right?
Whether I said something or not.
Right. But I also think in that they were just trying to represent all different types of people in America. So they were trying to represent, in some ways, different types of women as well. Because you did, even in the 60s, you had the mamas and you had the daughters and you had the wife, you know, like you had that kind of dynamic even then. Even though, to be honest, they were all tied to men somehow, some way. They ended up, they I want to say manipulated, but maneuvered in those roles differently, you know.
Yeah, very true. Very true.
As women. So, and then that shows up obviously differently on screen when they go to render those characters. So, yeah, no, I'm glad you caught that, because I think her character, and she's actually a really famous comedian actress named Ethel Merman, famous at the time. She was kind of playing this like old bag, like nagging old wife, old mom type character, which people loved to put in their films back then. It was either like the young hot wife or the old bag, you know. That was kind of the stereotypes women fell into, and I think she definitely was encapsulating that. But, you know, Mama went after hers, and I'm not mad about it.
Certainly did.
You know, she was right there at the end with them, like, who are you? when the police officer pulled up. But yeah, so yeah, I think something else, just to go back to that rat race idea, something else I think is really interesting is like how class plays into this. Like you were saying, there's millionaires and there's truck drivers and there's cab drivers. And then there's like, you know, the guys in the airplane and the Australian guys. So like all different types of ranges of, you know, wealth already. And then they, you know, they start to try to, but they're all going for this money, right? So I think that kind of defeats the idea of like a meritocracy, like all is fair and may the best man win, you know? It's basically like the best snake wins, you know, like who can be the most deceptive.
Yeah. That's very, very true. That's a good one.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And as we wrap up, I do have one more scene that I think was really, really, really impactful. And it's because it was the only scene that really featured Black characters. It was very brief. I don't know if you remember this. We see that couple driving through, it's like right at the beginning, that couple, they have all their belongings packed up and they're like headed west to California, right? So as they're heading west, they literally get ran off the road, derailed by all of the other passengers. Not all the passengers, all the other people going for the money. They're like,
Yeah.
they're like recklessly driving through, and they like run them off the road. And that
Mhm.
Black couple, all of their all of their belongings and stuff gets thrown out of their truck. All of their they basically crash, and the guy is like, "See, I never wanted to come to California," you know.
Yep. Yeah.
And yeah, so I took that as like a metaphor for like how reckless the pursuit of wealth can be, that they
Mhm.
basically derail any kind of, genuine wholehearted progress. These people are trying to get out of California, start a new life, right?
Yep.
They basically so they derail these people of color who are trying to make a way for themselves, you know?
Mhm.
Which honestly to me is a metaphor for like basically how white America's wealth is built on the backs of Black people and people of color, right? It's like we
Right.
got to
Yeah.
kick
Okay.
them out of the way to make sure we get to the gold. You know what I
Yeah. Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Even if
Mhm.
that means even if that means we got to do some really wild, reckless stuff to do it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I took that as like the black couple. Obviously, they just had no chance of ever achieving that. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, and
Like they
they
just
clearly
had
showed
the
that.
opportunity were there for them. Period.
Yeah, it wasn't there for them, and not only did they not know about it, they
Mhm.
literally just trying to get their own, just trying to go establish
Yeah.
something for themselves. They can't even do that
Mhm.
because they
Yeah, and
get
like
derailed.
California then was kind of like the promised land, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
And they couldn't even get there. They couldn't even get there without
Yeah.
someone knocking them off their path. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and it's like senselessly losing all
mhm,
of their
mhm.
possessions that they were never
Yeah.
really they weren't a part of, they weren't privy to, they were never invited to join. It was
Yeah.
like, we just kinda ended up here and all of our stuff's getting taken for what, you know?
Mhm. I think another thing that was interesting too is like with everyone else they ran into, they kind of like move out of their way, if you will,
Yeah.
or like move to the side of the road, or um, they don't just blatantly stay there and knock them off the road. You know what I mean? So,
Mhm.
which I don't know if they like knew the African American couple were in the car coming towards them. But that's the only
Mhm.
like everybody else. They meet other people. They like move over. While they're like on the road or whatever, they move over to the side, or like the other cars that are approaching them move over to the side, and get out of their way. But the only one that they kind of like pretty much go on like a head to head car escapade with is the African American couple.
Oh,
So
yeah, absolutely,
very
yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, that scene, I was like, it's so brief, but I think that felt very intentional to me. I was like,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
there
yeah.
for a
Oh, for sure.
reason.
Yeah.
That definitely felt, like it was there for a reason. And you
Mhm.
mentioned something too just now about, like, California being the promised land. As we know, like, in American history, the manifest destiny was basically what the West
Mhm.
was and has always been
Yeah.
is, like, this open territory where everybody can succeed. If you just go out there, you can make it.
Mhm.
It's like this open land that has been kinda unsettled, unclaimed. You can go out there, strike your fortune, and we know about, like, the
Mhm.
49ers and people looking for gold, and, there's so much history tied to, like, coming out to the West Coast to make it. Even today, people go to LA all the
Oh, for
time
sure.
to make it, or people
Make it.
come to Western cities to make it. It has this cultural myth in America that the West is where you can if you ain't make it on the East Coast, you can come out to the West Coast. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
the West is the promised land.
Exactly, and so I think it's interesting that the whole locale of the film is in Southern California, quote, "the West," where not only we
Mhm.
see the white people out here rushing, trying to, like, get the gold, make it, we also see Black people coming out here to try to make it. Everybody's got this drive to, like, make it, make it, make it. I'm gonna make it, or
Mhm.
I'm gonna get
Mhm.
something. I'm gonna strike
Yeah.
it rich. My fortune is out here, or some sort of life-altering success is gonna come to
Mhm.
me out here. So it's got this
Yeah.
idea of, like, extracting something from the land itself, and so I think
Mhm.
that was really in some ways, you can look at this as almost kinda like a little bit of like a Western in some ways, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
for
like,
sure. Yeah.
we're gonna go find what was promised us. It was like a kind of a capitalist version of what a Western might look like, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And to like further on the African American couple versus everybody else. I think
Mhm.
there's also I don't know if they purposely did this, but with the current climate of our world now, I definitely think there is a theme of like white privilege.
Oh yeah.
And what I mean by that is like, they knocked this African American couple off the road and they are literally like beneath everybody else
Mm-hmm.
from, running off the cliff into the desert essentially. On top of, they're now at a disadvantage, even more of a disadvantage because they've lost all their
Absolutely.
things. They've
Nobody
their
helps
car
come
is probably
helps them
damaged.
out.
Nobody's coming to help them. They're in the middle of nowhere. They're all of their things are like loose, like now they really don't have anything.
Mm-hmm.
On top of like financially, they're out there like from basically what he's saying is like I didn't want to come to California.
Mm-hmm.
They're out there likely looking for the opportunity. So
Yeah.
they've left everything they've had behind to go out there, and now they're probably put even
They're worse
further behind.
off.
So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
like you hate to say it, but it's so true. It's like the American
Mhm.
dream is so honestly like tied to white privilege that, to be
Oh yeah.
honest, as a Black person, not only are when you're trying to go for it and like do what, because people tell you to like just go for your dreams, just try bootstrap, right?
Yeah.
That's what bootstrapping is. They tell people to do that all the time. But then you try it and it's like you get knocked down even more because of the
Mhm.
privileged people. It's like what I started
Oh
out
yeah.
with, I have even less now,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think that definitely shows because they did have stuff, but when they were coming out there and now they don't, and
Mhm.
nobody was going to
Exactly.
help them. Nobody even paid
Yep.
them any attention. They just
Nope.
hit them and
You
kept
don't
it
see them
moving.
again. Yep, you don't even
Yeah.
see them again. So, I mean, all you see is them going downhill rapidly. Like I said, they're visually you are seeing like, the white people are on top, the Black people are beneath. And
Hmm.
nobody comes to the rescue. Nobody checks on them. Nobody like they're just so consumed by this opportunity to become rich that they don't even care what's happened to the couple. Let alone they don't think they realize that they're Black or white. They don't
Hmm.
even stop to check and be like, oh, like this person's life could be, in danger or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's just ironic that they're Black. So,
Yeah. No, I think it's intentional that they're Black because they could have casted
oh
white
no, it's
people.
definitely intentional. But I do think like from the point of view from like the people who are acting in it or
Yeah.
like the scene that you
The
see, they're
characters.
not. I
Yeah.
don't think they're fully aware, but they didn't care, so it didn't really matter.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, should we anything you want to say about the end before we wrap up? Because those are really good points we all made.
Yeah.
I'm trying to
Uh,
like what happens at the end. I think the end is just funny to me. It takes them so long to realize where the big ass W is.
yeah, it takes them
you
forever.
know.
Which the one lady, she that was not really uninterested in the money. She finds it, which I think that's like usually how it goes. People who are truly uninterested in being millionaires are just maybe like passionate in what they do or what they want. Um,
Hmm.
or if you will, like I guess more focused, they are likely to become wealthy, right? If
Hmm.
you will, because they're not compromising maybe themselves or other things to make sure they have these things, morals and values, or not. Maybe that's what it is, not compromising like morals and values or something like that. I don't know. But she finds a W, and she's the one that kind of she's the first one to realize what it is. So
Yeah.
interesting.
But then they also don't give her. But then eventually the other ones find out before she
Hmm.
can get to it, and it's like again another
Yeah,
minority group of woman is kind of slighted because it's like she
that's
really
sad.
knew
Yeah,
she knew before they did because they
yeah.
were all still running around like where is it at, like really just
Mhm.
arguing with each other, and she just happened to be standing there and looked up and was like, oh, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And then she wasn't gonna tell anybody. She just
yeah,
was
she
like
wasn't.
plotting how she could, get out of there and like just do it strategically,
Hmm.
um, and not cause like a ruckus really because she was just over it.
Yeah.
So good for her, but ultimately she did not get the money.
Yeah.
So
It's just interesting that this definitely shows like the hierarchy in America because it really is about these men, these white men, these wealthier white men who already have resources trying to get more, and everybody from there, their wives and then the, servants and the people of color,
mhm.
um all of those stratified layers, they end up being the ones who get kicked out or removed or dismissed somehow in the film, you know?
Yeah, I think the
Yeah.
ending is also pretty interesting too, that the, so, another spoiler, which I was, like, debating whether or not I should say this, but I'm gonna say it for the purposes, um, of my point. So at the end, they are, they lose the money. They lose the money. Watch the movie to
Oh,
see how
yeah,
they lose the
we
money.
gotta talk about how they lost
Yeah.
this money, because that's actually
They
really
lose the money.
important.
They
Yeah.
lose the money, and the money gets distributed to, I guess you could say, like, a community of people that are in this town, in this part of California that they're in now.
Mhm.
And they all are, like, still fighting for this money still, even though the money's gone. They're still
Mhm.
fighting for this money, to
Mhm.
the point where now they have to fight for their lives. And so
Yeah.
it was truly comes down to life or death
Mhm.
to have this money. And at the point of, if they got this money, they were probably still gonna get hurt or die, because someone was gonna fight them for it, or try
Mhm.
to come back and get it, or find them, or manipulate them, or whatever. So, like, having that money was going to be a risk, and they were still willing to risk it all.
Yes.
So,
I thought it was so poetic seeing that all that money fall, because like, at the end, it was like a group of basically all the men were, like, running through this building, fighting each other, right?
mhm,
"Let me get the suitcase." The suitcase was the money's in the suitcase. Like, "I gotta get the suitcase, I gotta get the suitcase." And they end up fumbling it so much that the money just burst out of the
just falls
suitcase.
out.
And I
Mhm.
was like, "That's so poetic," because really that's just, like, redistribution of wealth. Like,
Yep.
all that money y'all thought was gonna be in one person's hand at the very top, and
Mhm.
one of y'all's hand, this little small group of
And now it's
people,
in
is
everybody's.
now everybody's, and there's no chance of you getting it back, because 'cause I'll be
Mhm.
danged if somebody hands back any of those bills. They're like, "Money
Oh,
raining
yeah.
out of the sky, I'm taking
Especially,
it."
yeah, 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 and, I think also too, it's very indicative that they're in this building, right? And they're, like, kinda, like, on top of everybody else, right? Kinda showing
Yeah,
their,
and it all
um
falls down. It's like
and it
falling
all
down to the
falls down. It keep
crowds.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That was such a poetic scene. I was like, this to me,
Mhm.
this is definitely saying redistribution of wealth. It's like
Yeah.
those at the top by because when you think you're doing everything you can to hoard wealth, something happens and
Mhm.
then sudden it has to go to the public anyways,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
know? So
Mhm.
that was actually a happy note that I think the film kind of ended on, was like, nobody gets it. None of you crooks get it.
Yep.
Everybody else gets it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. That's
Um
true.
and so I actually think the film is showing a lot of stuff about the, like, top percent of people, or that small group of people, like, we're really
Mhm.
examining their characters, but then at the end, it leaves a lot of hope that we really can redistribute wealth and give everybody an opportunity, you know what I mean? Or give
Mhm.
everybody a little bit of this money. It doesn't have to be held by this one person, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Or this small group of people, you know?
Mhm, mhm. And the thing is, like, if they weren't, like, greedy, because it wasn't that they didn't have money, um, I think if they weren't so selfish in their thought processes of trying to get the money, it would've first of all, it would've been better and easier,
Mhm.
and I think it would have it's kinda like, I guess, like, another theme of, like, just moving with gratefulness, gratitude, um
Mhm.
with, just poise and kindness, I guess. It gets you a lot further, than being greedy, selfish, um, and, just
Yeah.
greedy, and I don't what's like another word? They're just like dogs. Like, there's just like
Yeah, like, they're like
essentially like letting
snakes.
lions loose. Like
Yeah,
lions just
'cause
fighting for territory.
they actually, it's like the irony is they found the money and then lost it all. It's like the guy was right.
Mhm.
So, like, they weren't
Yeah.
fighting for nothing, or they
Mhm.
weren't fighting for nothing, but because you were fighting in the first place is why you lost it. You know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of the irony of it all, and I think that's what makes this film and really the script. I wanna read the script too at some point.
Mhm.
So impactful is because it's like it's just so true. Like they were saying this in 1963, but you could really look at a lot of 2023 and see this is how people are. Like, to be honest, those people who were fighting are like the billionaires, or like
Mhm.
congressmen, or people who have that kind of power or have that resource or access, and everybody
Mhm.
below waiting, hoping for money, or hoping to, at least get something, or just kinda, like, waiting for a break, you know what I mean? So yeah, that scene was really, really impactful, I think. And it's a really good, smart way, I think, to round out that film,
Yeah.
you know? But yeah, so I think this film on the surface, really got two levels. Surface, it's really, you can look at this and not have a critical eye at all and just enjoy the
Oh,
film
yeah.
and be like, "Oh, look at those
Yeah.
idiots." But you read into it, you really see this is to me, a very serious satirical critique on lots of different things, but particularly American drive for money, greed, capitalism, the kind of rat race we're all aware of, the idea of like the West and making it out in the West, and humanity's drive for money and spoils of the dead, and what competition looks like, and how we treat people of color, how we treat women, you know what I mean? Like all of these things are really tied up in here, and it's just like,
Yeah.
it becomes kind of this like American buffoonery, in my opinion,
True.
So yeah, we encourage you guys to watch It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. You can find it for free on Tubi. If not on Tubi, it's pretty much American classic now. It's a classic comedy. So I'm sure you can probably find it on like archive.org or another streaming service. I want to say it's also on Pluto TV if you have that. But
Yeah.
classic American comedy is out there somewhere. Your library probably got it. Like it's been around for a while, So definitely watch it and then listen to this podcast. And we hope you can pick up on some of those themes and maybe you can find some new ones yourself. But yeah, been nice talking to you guys.
Yeah, we'll join us in the next one.
Yes, join us in the next one. Bye, everybody.